I want to take a brief informal survey this morning. You don't have to participate. It's not a requirement. You may find I'm going to give you one of two categories. You may find that you don't fit neatly into either of those two categories, and that's fine. But if you do find that you sort of tend toward one of these things or the other, it would be helpful if you could respond. So first, raise your hand if you like or enjoy the study of history. You like history, right? Reading about it, watching shows and videos about it, hearing about it, talking about it, all right? Okay, you've already put your hands down. Thank you. Now, raise your hand if you just really do not care for history. You don't like it. You don't enjoy the study of it. Be honest. Come on, nobody's going to throw anything. There's a few of you, okay? All right, so those would be people that history just does nothing for you. It bores you. It puts you to sleep. You'd rather do anything else but talk about history. Thank you for your participation, by the way. People tend to have, from time to time, strong feelings about the study of history. And I think there are two big contributing factors, maybe not the only ones, but significant ones. First, I have found that people who enjoy history tend to love stories. And second, people who enjoy history tend to have had really good history teachers. I'm a solid 100% on all of those. I love history. And I think I love history in part because I love stories. I love watching them. I love listening to them. I love reading them and telling them. And I think I love history in part because I had some really fantastic history teachers who were passionate about what they taught, who loved history themselves, who loved teaching it, and who made history come alive. Susan Bittman, 10th grade world history, Chamberlain High School. Unbelievable history teacher. Frank Laundy, maybe one of the greatest teachers I've ever had, 11th grade American history. He was phenomenal. He just passed away a couple of years ago. Amazing teacher. Karen Bullock, Southwestern Seminary, taught me Baptist history. Phenomenal teacher. Like every week, I would look forward to sitting in that class because she made all these dates and people and events come alive to us sitting in that room. What they convinced me of is that history matters. George Santayana famously said, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to what? Repeat it." Some of you have heard that quote before. George Hegel, philosopher, said, "What experience and history teach is that nations and governments have never learned anything from history." Lord Byron, the poet, said, "The best prophet of the future is the past." History matters. It instructs, it informs, it warns. It matters because we naturally tend, I think, to have a very limited, very self-focused perspective. We typically only know and only think about, what we have seen ourselves, what we have heard for ourselves, what we have experienced ourselves, what we have lived through ourselves. We have what's called a recency bias. You'll hear it when people say things like this: "We have never been more divided as a nation than we are right now." We had a civil war, folks. That's not new. Or, "This is the most politically violent time in our history." In 1968, there was a brawl, like fistfights on the floor of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and two national political figures were assassinated that year. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, right? This is nothing new, this political violence that we're experiencing. Or this, you'll hear people say, "We have never seen this level of political incivility and insults and name-calling at any point in our history." Thomas Jefferson called John Quincy Adams a hermaphrodite, half man, half woman. like publicly. John Quincy Adams said that Andrew Jackson's mother and wife were, how do you say, ladies of the evening, like publicly. There is nothing new under the sun. It has been this bad before. So studying history gives us perspective. It allows us a broader look at what we believe is not just history, but his story, the record of God's unfolding purposes over time in the world and through mankind. It helps us see that there is more than just what there is now. History matters. And I say all that because Daniel 11 presents us with a vision given by God to Daniel that turns out to be a long, arduous, convoluted historical account spanning at least 375 years, possibly, probably even continuing to our present day and into the future. And so it's very easy to get lost in it. It's easy to get bored with it. It's easy to sort of check out on it. In fact, if I did what we typically do here on Sunday mornings and read the entire chapter, which is 45 verses, by the way, most of you would probably fall asleep by the end. And those who weren't asleep, you would just sort of get that glazed over look in your eyes as you daydream about lunch. So because there is so much history packed into this chapter, I'm not going to read it all. I'm going to summarize large portions of it. I'm going to read other parts. And then I'm going to highlight the verses that I think are foundational to the main message, which is this: the pursuits of earthly rulers are futile, fixed, and fleeting. The pursuits of earthly rulers are futile, fixed, and fleeting. So if you would go ahead and take a Bible, open it to Daniel 11, and just sort of keep it open there for quick reference as we jump in. I am going to go ahead and start by reading just the first 4 verses. So this is Daniel chapter 11, verses 1 through 4. So the Holy Spirit speaks to us through Daniel when he writes these words. Daniel 11, verse 1. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. This is an angel speaking, by the way, to Daniel. He says, and now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. The first truth that we see here is that the pursuits of earthly powers are futile. This chapter opens with Darius the Mede, the first king of the Medo-Persian Empire, who came to power about 539 BC, then moves quickly to 3 more unnamed kings, and then settles on a 4th in succession. This 4th king, we're told, will be richer and stronger than those before him, and it's most likely speaking of Xerxes the First, also known by the name Ahasuerus, known to us as the husband of Queen Esther in the Old Testament. And if you're a movie buff, if you've watched the movie 300, he's the golden god king there that comes in on the accompanied in by his army. The vision then shifts to another king, a mighty king with great dominion, whose kingdom will quickly be divided into 4 kingdoms, not ruled by any of his offspring. That's certainly a reference to Alexander the Great, the king of Greece, who conquered the known world by age 32, was dead by age 33, and divided his kingdom into 4 regions to be ruled by 4 of his generals. Now, 2 of those 4 regions become the focus of verses 5 through 20. Their successive rulers are called kings of the south and kings of the north. The kings of the south are those known as the Ptolemies. That actually starts with a P. If you don't know your history, it's Ptolemy. The Ptolemies who ruled over Egypt, that was Ptolemy the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. There were 6 of them. The kings of the north are the Seleucids who ruled over Syria and Persia. Seleucus the first through the fourth, and then Antiochus the first through the fourth. And the reason these 2 particular kingdoms matter, the reason these 2 particular kingdoms are highlighted, is that sandwiched between Egypt in the south and Syria in the north is Israel in the land of Canaan. The glorious land, as it's called in verse 16. The home that was promised to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all their descendants. The land Daniel and his people had been taken from, the land they had begun to rebuild, and the land that they would one day return to and inhabit again. And so the political and military activities of these 2 lands, Egypt to the south and Syria to the north, and their rulers would come to have a profound impact on the Jewish people right there in the middle. So verses 5 through 20 covers 364 years of nations and armies and wars and battles and attacks and victories and defeats and treaties and coalitions and successions and betrothals and marriages and murders and lies and schemes and conspiracies and betrayals and disasters and tragedies and all kinds of political turmoil. It's like daytime television if you were to put that on the screen, or as we like to call it in our house, Mama's Stories. And even though this was written hundreds of years in advance of the actual events, it predicts them with such incredible accuracy that some critics conclude that it had to be written after it had already occurred. Like no one could be that accurate in their predictions. And of course that's true unless the vision came from an all-knowing God who determines the end from the beginning, right? So let me give you just one example of this. Look at verses 6 and 7. It says, after some years they shall make an alliance, these 2 kingdoms, these 2 kings from the south and the north. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he in his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch, from her roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. So here's what actually happened in the historical record. It's way more interesting than just reading it on the page. The king of the south, Ptolemy II, wanted to make an alliance with the king of the north, Antiochus II. And so he offers his daughter, Berenice, to be the wife of the king of the north. Just one problem, the king of the north is already married. So the king of the north, Antiochus, he divorces his current wife, Laodice, and marries Berenice, the daughter of the king of the south. Well, not long after that, the king of the south, Ptolemy II, dies, and seeing no further political advantage, the king of the north decides that he doesn't need that wife anymore, that wife that he just married, Berenice, so he divorces her, sends her back home with their son. They've had a son in the meantime. Sends her back to Egypt and goes and retrieves his first wife, Laodice, that he kicked to the curb, and remarries her. You can imagine Laodice's thoughts about that whole situation, right? You got rid of me out of convenience. Now that it's no longer a political advantage to you, you want me back. She's not crazy that she was tossed aside in the first place. So what do you think she does? She proceeds to poison her husband, Antiochus. And then she has that second wife and their son killed as well. Well, back in Egypt, Berenice's brother comes to rule since his dad died, and he has Laodicea captured and murdered. It's 300 years of this, right? So back and forth, you did this to me, so I'm going to get you back, and I'm going to make sure that everybody suffers. Well, then somebody comes up in their place, and they get the other folks back. But the main idea demonstrated over and over and over again is the futility of these endeavors, these pursuits, these plans, these schemes. For every attainment, every achievement, every victory, there is a reversal of it. Every gain comes with a corresponding loss. Look at verses 3 and 4. We just read a second ago. Then a mighty king shall arise, shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided. Look at verse 9. Then the latter shall come to the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Look at verse 12. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. Look at verse 18. And afterwards he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Gain and loss, advance and retreat, over and over, time and time again, progress is made, progress is lost, leaving everything back where it started. Nobody gets anywhere. Nobody really accomplishes anything. Every effort is in vain. Every attempt to exert power is futile. The tide comes in, and then what? Tide goes out and nothing changes. Sounds a lot like Ecclesiastes, doesn't it? Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there's nothing new under the sun. But that message would have been incredibly encouraging to Daniel. And it should be incredibly encouraging to us. When we feel like we are at the mercy of the powers of this age, the self-exalting rulers of this world who seem to do whatever they want, this reminds us and assures us that God has taken their schemes and their designs and their plans and their pursuits, and God has hardwired frustration and futility into them so that they accomplish nothing in the final analysis. They end right back where they began, just going in circles. Utter futility. Any earthly power that would seek to control you or oppress you or persecute you or destroy you, hear this, they will not prevail. Their actions and their activities are ultimately futile. God is in control of history. Earthly powers are powerless. The second truth is that the pursuits of earthly powers are fixed. Not just futile, but they're fixed. The actions and the activities of the rulers of this world proceed according to God's appointed time. You see this in particular in verses 21 through 35, where the previous section covered over a dozen leaders spanning 360 years. These verses 21 through 35, focus on a single ruler. Look at verse 21. It says, "In his place shall rise a contemptible person, to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. This ruler is described as a contemptible person who has not been granted royal authority, but who sneaks in and charms his way to power. This part of the passage is almost certainly describing Antiochus IV Epiphanes. You may remember we spent quite a bit of time and attention on him back in chapter 8. He was the little boastful horn who grew exceedingly great in his own mind, who did everything in his power to try to eradicate Jewish religious practices. He wanted to turn all the Jews into Greeks, worshiping Greek gods, practicing Greek customs, embracing Greek cultures. And so he outlawed all of their Jewish religious practices. He outlawed circumcision and temple sacrifices and Sabbath observances under the threat of death. He even made it illegal to have a copy of the scriptures. He turned the temple into a shrine for the Greek god Zeus and sacrificed a pig on the temple altar. These verses here in chapter 11 highlight some of those same events, but with some background and detail that we hadn't been given before. Look at verse 29. It says, "At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder." And again, that fits perfectly with the historic record. Antiochus IV attempted to invade Egypt in 168 BC. He was met by the Romans, who were this new rising power in the world. The Roman general met Antiochus. He says, I've got a decree from the Roman Senate that says you need to go back to Egypt, or you need to go back to Syria and leave Egypt alone. Either that or you can stay and make yourself an enemy of Rome. Well, legend says that Antiochus responded that he would have to go back and discuss it with his advisors. That Roman general took a stick and in the sand drew a circle around Antiochus's feet and said, "You have to make a choice before you step out of that circle." Well, Antiochus made the only choice he could. He didn't want to be an enemy of Rome, and so he turned and headed for home. But he wasn't happy. In fact, he was furious. And on his route back north, as he passed through Jerusalem, he took his anger out on the Jews, slaughtering many of them and enacting all of those religious demands that I mentioned a moment ago. A contemptible person, without question. But notice the idea that the vision drives home repeatedly. In verse 24, we're told that Antiochus will devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. Only for a time. What does that indicate? His rule is temporary. It seems fixed, set in stone, not up for debate, not up for negotiation. That is confirmed by the repeated phrase, "the time appointed." Look at verse 27. "And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed." Verse 29, "At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south." Verse 35, And some of the wise shall stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. 3 times it uses that phrase, indicating that there is a set, fixed time for these things appointed by God. All of these events, even the most terrible, even the most horrific, even the most oppressive, will take place according to God's schedule. Isaiah 46:10 says that God declares the end from the beginning, that his counsel will stand, that he will accomplish his purpose. He has already decreed whatever comes to pass, including the beginning and end of every earthly power and all of their activities between. And again, that would have encouraged and reassured Daniel. And it should for us as well. That no event, no action, no historical occurrence, or any decision of any ruler is random or haphazard or outside of the eternal decree and design of God. No evil ruler or wicked regime is calling the shots. Even the most chaotic, most painful times are appointed times. God is in control of history. Earthly powers are powerless. And then the final truth that we see in Daniel 11 is that the pursuits of earthly powers are fleeting. They're futile, they're fixed, and they're fleeting. Now, at first glance, if you were to read verse 36, it seems to be a continuation of the account of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the contemptible ruler. Just more bad stuff from this same bad guy. But there's a shift that takes place here that you wouldn't notice if you don't know history. You see, in verse 36, the vision begins saying things about this king that don't fit what we know of Antiochus. For instance, beginning in verse 36, it says, "And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, and he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts." Well, from what we know of Antiochus in history, he doesn't seem to have exalted himself above every god, rejected the gods of his fathers, or worshiped a god unknown to his fathers. He worshiped the Greek pantheon, all the Greek gods. He focused his attention specifically on Zeus. He certainly saw himself as a human representative of Zeus, but he didn't consider himself superior to Zeus. And Zeus certainly was known by and worshiped by his ancestors. So that doesn't really fit with what we know of Antiochus. Look at verse 42. "He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the precious things of Egypt." Antiochus never ruled Egypt, like it says this king will. Look at verse 45. "And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain," that's the Mediterranean Sea in Jerusalem, "yet he shall come to his end with none to help." Antiochus didn't die in Israel between the Mediterranean Sea and Jerusalem. He died in Persia. So if this vision has been so precise and so accurate with every prediction up to this point, but these specific prophecies aren't true of Antiochus, it seems that these verses are likely pointing to somebody else. Someone like Antiochus, but distinct from him. Throughout history, some people have said that this king is a reference to the Roman Empire. John Calvin believed that. Or some believed that it was pointing ahead to Herod or Muhammad or even the Pope. But the fact that his end in verse 45 immediately ushers in the final resurrection that Caleb's going to preach about next week, that suggests that this king who will do as he wills is an end times figure. If that's a correct reading of the vision, Antiochus, that wicked enemy of God and God's people from way back in the 2nd century BC, is a foreshadowing. He is a pattern. He is a model for a number of evil, brutal rulers throughout history, but ultimately, he is a type of the final opponent of God's people. One who is like Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, but radically worse. In verses 36 and 37, we're told he will regard himself as a god, subject to no other authority. We see that description applied in 2 Thessalonians 2 to an end times figure called the man of lawlessness. Listen to what Paul says about this man who will appear at the end of time. He says, "Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God." That sounds pretty spot on with what we saw in Daniel 11, right? In Daniel 11, verses 38 and 39, we're told he will make war and military conquest will be his God, his object of worship. Combat becomes his tool of acquiring power. We're told in verse 39 that he will secure loyalty by seduction. He will have a following. He will be able to persuade large masses to do his bidding, to give their devotion to him. And in verses 40 through 44, we are told that he will conquer and dominate the world, which is terrifying, right? It ought to be. The thought of one who claims to be a god conquering the world through warfare, that's unsettling. That is distressing. But I want you to see something. The vision spent 9.5 verses talking about the character and the evil activity of this wicked ruler. But then in the last half of the last verse, he's defeated. Just like that quickly, that decisively, so fast, so final, so brief and abrupt that it almost makes him an afterthought in history. The one who conquers nations, the one who oppresses God's people, is wiped off the stage of history in 7 words. Yet he shall come to his end. And it's done. His rule is fleeting and final. He goes out not with a bang, but with a whimper. We see that same abrupt, anticlimactic end to the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians that I just read about. It says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, "And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming." Not some huge, drawn-out conflict and battle. He comes, he's revealed, and just that quickly he's defeated, killed in a moment by the breath of Jesus, brought to nothing. Revelation 20, verse 9 describes that same kind of defeat waiting for the armies of Satan himself. It says, "And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city." Listen to this. "But fire came down from heaven and consumed them." That's it. That's the end of the battle. They're geared up for a fight. Fire comes down and they're done. And that should encourage us. shouldn't it? That the time given to our greatest adversary is not only in God's hands, but it is short, and he will be brought to a quick and decisive end. You know, we don't have to wait to find out how everything's going to end. We've read the last page. We know the end of the story. And in the end, the devil loses, evil loses, sin loses, pain and sorrow and loss and disappointment and the powers of this world all lose, and Jesus wins. And if we're on his side, guess what? We win. God controls the end of all things. Earthly powers are powerless. You see, God does what the rulers of this world wish they could do, what they want to do, what they long to do, but find themselves unable to do. Earthly powers are futile, fixed, and fleeting. God, on the other hand, brings his will to pass. God fixes times and seasons, and God reigns forever. I mean, that's the heart of the gospel, isn't it? That in light of the sin and rebellion of people like us, God promised to set things right, to send a deliverer to undo sin and defeat evil and bring the people he had made back to himself. And Galatians 4:4 tells us that when the fullness of time had come, at the time appointed by God in eternity past, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law so that we might receive adoption as his children. Romans 5:6 says that while we were still weak, at the right time, at the time appointed by God, fixed by God in eternity past, Christ died for the ungodly. 1 Timothy 6:15 says that the Lord Jesus Christ will appear at the proper time in all of his glory, the time fixed and appointed by God in eternity past. In Revelation 22:13, Jesus declares, "Behold, I am coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done." And listen to what he says. He says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." So what do we do as finite, flawed people until that day? That day in the future that has been fixed and appointed by God for the return of Christ and the setting right of all things. What do we do until then? Ephesians 6, we put on the armor of God and we stand firm. We pray at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. We keep alert with perseverance. We refuse to fear powerless earthly powers, and we refuse to trust in powerless earthly powers. We resist them, standing firm in the faith. We hold fast and we press on. Can we commit to do that together this morning, church? Can we commit to doing those things together as a church while we wait on that day? Let's pray.